In the fall of 1986, an up-and-coming Seattle frontman walked out of rehab wondering how he was going to stay clean. As fortune would have it, he received a call from another legendary Seattle lead singer who invited him to be his roommate in a drug-free environment. Their time rooming together was the genesis of an epic musical bromance. Now today, we're diving deep into their story and a song that has stood in memorial to that friendship for over 3 decades. The story's next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if passengers who are riding with you are always asking you to turn the music down, you know, when you're riding your car or their car, you're going to love this channel. Subscribe below right now. Make sure to click the bell so that you never miss out. And also check out our Patreon below. There you're going to find additional footage, helps us to do more videos and more interviews. You can become an honorary producer as well to help us curate the music history here. You know, in the last interview that Andrew Wood ever gave, he opened up about his fight with drug addiction and what life after rehab was like. It's a total struggle, he said. When you first get out, you're on this pink cloud and it's pretty easy. But after a while, things start getting more real and you just have to stay straight a second at a time. Drug use was a demon that haunted Wood for the majority of his brief life. Alcoholism and substance abuse were very prevalent in his family growing up. At the age of 7, he got drunk off his first Kinder beer. At 12, he discovered marijuana, and throughout his teens, those closest to Andrew Wood encouraged him to experiment with a range of harmful substances. There was LSD, crystal meth, cocaine, and heroin. It's just heartbreaking to even think about, but Andy discovered something else at a young age as well, rock and roll, including the music of Kiss, Stones, Zeppelin. As you listen to the rock of his youth in the 70s, he dreamed of becoming a rock star. And in 1980, at the age of just 14, he formed the band Malfunction with his older brother, Kevin. Even though he's just a kid, Andy was a natural showman, brimming with charisma and heart. He had a dominating voice and also proved to be a very talented songwriter. All this along with his boyish rock star look. He captivated audiences as he and Seattle's underground music scene grew up together. Musically, the sky was really the limit for Andy. And by 1986, Malfunction recorded their first 2 singles on the Pioneer Grunge compilation, Deep Six, a 14-track collaboration that showcased Seattle's up-and-coming rock talent, with the likes of Soundgarden, Green River, the Melvins, the U-Men, and Skin Yard. But for all that positive momentum, Andy didn't have a future if he couldn't get clean. Drug dependency had taken over his life, and he knew it. So at the age of 21, he checked himself into rehab. Andy did well there and soon recovered, but as he walked out the doors into his new life, he was freaking out. Going home meant going back to his old circle of negative influences. He didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, at this time, Soundgarden vocalist Chris Cornell needed a roommate. He'd asked his friend, Green River guitarist Stone Gossard, to move in. Stone declined, recommending Andrew Wood instead. Though Chris and Andy had crossed paths at the Deep Six recording sessions and different shows around Seattle, at this point they barely knew each other. Chris reached out anyway, and Andy accepted. It was a miracle for Wood, who desperately needed a sober environment. Chris's home became a musical sanctuary, and the 2 vocalists became fast friends. Though differing in personality and perspective, the pair enjoyed a season of intense creativity, collaboration, and friendly competition. The 2 singers wrote songs on a daily basis. They played them for each other, and they compared notes. While Chris was contemplative and given to a more analytical process, Andy rarely revised his initial take. Remembering those days, Chris Cornell would say, I'd record stuff of his and he'd record stuff of mine, and we would really like each other's stuff. He was so freeform. He'd write 10 songs in the time it would take me to write 2. He was so prolific that diamonds would come out so freely. There was this sense that we were a band. It was like we were a team. Around this time, Andy also met his girlfriend, Xana Lufuente, who joked that if either Chris or Andy had been a girl, probably would have fallen in love. It was definitely a honeymoon period for Andy and a time of much-needed renewal. Eventually, Andy and Xana got their own place, and Andy went back to work with his brother Kevin in Malfunction, though that band wouldn't last much longer. On the side, Andy connected with Green River musicians Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard for a new project. They called themselves Lords of the Wasteland. But with the addition of Bruce Fairweather and Greg Gilmore, things got a little more serious. Andy talked them into changing the band name to Mother Love Bone, and Malfunction quietly fell by the wayside. This newly formed band quickly set out recording, playing, Seattle area shows, and soon there was talk of actually getting signed. Things were moving really fast, not only for Mother Love Bone, but for Soundgarden as well. Cornell remembered, all in a period of a few months, we went from being these two roommates and two obscure bands that we never thought anyone was going to hear of, to getting all this attention from big labels, and everybody all of a sudden is writing about us. It was really cool to have it happen to your friend at the same time, so you could just be excited together. In November 1988, Mother Love Bone signed with Polygram and recorded their EP Shine at Seattle's London Bridge Studios. It would be released in the spring. Now, Shine, what a great EP. It included the awe-inspired masterpiece, Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, which was later featured on the 1992 single soundtrack. In fact, Cameron Crowe was well ahead of the grunge explosion. He actually put this song in his 1989 film Say Anything. Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, one of my favorite songs ever. I'd put it in my top 10 of all time. Believe me, we will be covering this. We'll do an in-depth breakdown of the song. We'll see if we can get some time with Stone Gossard. That'd be awesome. Shine sold amazingly well, and in the spring of '89, his Love Bone set out on a 32-city in 30 days tour. Being out on the road actually opened Andy back up to familiar temptations, and he fell into old habits. Ashamed, Andy kept his addictions hidden as best he could, sometimes skipping rehearsals so his bandmates wouldn't find out. From September to November 1989, Mother Love Bone recorded their debut album, Apple. As the band worked together, it really became painfully obvious that Andy was sinking deeper into the abyss. And they tried to talk to him about getting clean, but Andy didn't want to talk. He didn't want his problems on anyone else's shoulders. However, after completing the studio work for Apple, Mother Love Bone and Xana confronted Andy and convinced him to return to rehab. So he spent much of December at an alcohol and drug recovery center. It was a time of painful introspection, anger, and self-blame for Andrew Wood. But like years before, Andy emerged from rehab with a renewed sense of hope and enthusiasm. This time, he was leaving drugs behind for good. There was a palpable excitement as the band readied for Apple's release in March. Andy was on the mend and regularly attending Narcotics Anonymous. His bandmates were, brainstorming how to keep Andy sober on the upcoming tour. For the most part, spirits were up. However, just like Andy alluded to in his final interview, you can't let your guard down for a second. Tragically, on March 16, 1990, Andy relapsed. It was just days before Apple's scheduled release. Xana found Andy face down, comatose on their bed, an empty needle nearby. Heroin had struck him hard. How Xana told the story, he was dead when I found him, and I didn't really realize it. I flipped him over and was shaking him. I looked at his arm and dialed 911. When they arrived, they pronounced him dead. They made me sign this paper and then told me to go to the hospital. They got his heart going again, but his brain had swelled up. We had a meeting with the doctors, and they said Andy's brain was dying. We had really 3 hours to say goodbye. His whole family was at the hospital. They all went in and saw him. Then all of his friends went in and saw him. I played some Queen for him. They were his favorite band. Life had just begun. The doctors turned everything off, and I just held him really tight and listened to his heart until it stopped. End of quote. Now, the official cause of death was listed as an accidental and acute overdose of heroin. Andy Wood was only 24 years old. Chris Cornell had been touring with Soundgarden in New York when he found out that Andy had overdosed. Chris returned to Seattle 2 days later and went straight to the hospital, making it just in time to say goodbye. I felt really alone when Andy died, he said. I spent a lot of time with him and tried to work out his pain creatively. Most of the time, I really didn't know Andy was using. Most of the time, it was me watching him struggle not to shoot up, not to drink. That's what Chris Cornell said. There is no question in my mind that Andy Wood, had he lived, we would be talking about him in the same reverence as the great ones, including his hero Freddie Mercury. All you have to do is listen to the epic Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, and I mean, you can hear the brilliance of Andy as an interpreter of song. I mean, he wrote it at 22, and he had so many shades to his voice, so many gears that he could shift into, from a melancholy, heart-wrenching subtleness to an in-your-face, rocket-to-the-moon explosiveness that would knock you into next week. Andrew Wood was an old soul for sure, emoting and writing from what seemed like a century of trial and heartbreaking experience. As a frontman, those who saw him live were changed forever. We really did miss out on a potential legend here. I'll just say it. He's a legend. It's like James Dean. He lived fast, he died young, and he left an incredible imprint. After Andy passed, Mother Love Bone dissolved. Bandmates Ament, Gossard, Gilmore, and Fairweather couldn't agree on how to move forward, so they went their separate ways. Cornell left with Soundgarden for Europe at that time, hoping that tour might help him forget about this pain. And yet Chris thought about Andy constantly. With no one to talk to about his grief, Cornell did what he did best. He wrote music. But these songs, they didn't sound like Soundgarden. They sounded like Andrew Wood. An idea started to form in Chris's mind. What if he recorded a tribute single with Andy's bandmates Jeff and Stone? Maybe they could find some closure and say goodbye in the right way. That single became the timeless eulogy, Say Hello to Heaven. Now, when Chris approached Jeff and Stone, they were in the process of forming a new band that would, of course, become Pearl Jam. But they were all for it. They brought with them new lead guitarist Mike McCready and an unknown San Diego singer named Eddie Vedder. Soundgarden's drummer Matt Cameron also joined the crew. Before long, the project turned into something else entirely. Chris and the guys felt like they owed more to Andy. They considered covering some of Andy's songs. But out of respect for Andy's family, they opted not to. Instead, they recorded a full-blown album in honor of Andrew Wood. For the name of the band and the record, they chose Temple of the Dog. It was a phrase lifted from the Mother Love Bone song, Man of Golden Words. Temple of the Dog recorded their album in November and December 1990, roughly a year after Mother Love Bone had recorded Apple. It consisted of 10 tracks. Fittingly, Say Hello to Heaven was their opener. Their most well-known song was Hunger Strike, or is Hunger Strike, I think. That was actually a last-minute addition. Though its lyrics weren't blatantly tied to Andy, its music video was located at a beach on Bainbridge Island, not far from where he grew up. The video was shot at sunset, which was another symbolic way to say goodbye. Temple of the Dog was released on April 16, 1991, and while the reviews were generally favorable, it's relatively unknown at that time. Part of their relative obscurity was due to the fact that Temple of the Dog was a side project. The band wasn't built for longevity. Pearl Jam hit the road to promote their debut album 10, and Soundgarden went back into the studio. But obscurity was okay. The project was about Andrew Wood and not about putting money in their pockets. That being said, when the Seattle music scene gained worldwide attention in the early 90s, interest percolated around Pearl Jam and Soundgarden's backstories, and Temple of the Dog made a visible resurgence. Say Hello to Heaven was the cathartic release that Chris Cornell desperately needed. He said, "I remember writing the lyrics because they were really different and they involved a real person. That wasn't something I'd normally do. I'd normally write a character that was part of me and part of a fictional character, but these lyrics specifically reflected Andy and my feelings about him. I didn't let anything else in. It was precious." A part of what makes Say Hello to Heaven so personal is Cornell's deliberate use of words and imagery drawn from Andy's life and from Mother Love Bone's music. The opening lyrics, "Please Mother Mercy, take me from this place." Take me from this place. That may have a dual meaning. In one sense, we hear Andy crying out for relief from addiction, but in another, they point to Cornell seeking escape from his grief. Truth, it's probably both. The book ends, he came from an island and then he died from the street. They say a lot in a few words. An island references Bainbridge Island where Andy grew up. But also Andy's determination to keep his pain to himself. Dying from the street is a clear allusion to Andy's heroin overdose. Cornell's lyrics express a multitude of emotions: grief, anger, frustration, possibly guilt. You can feel all of that when he returns to this idea of Andy's hidden world. And he hurt so bad like a soul breaking, but he never said nothing to me. Cornell is clearly in pain over not being able to save his friend. And you can almost hear Chris yelling at Andy to let him in as he sings these lines. The second verse is all about Xana, the poor stargazer. She was the inspiration for Mother Love Bone's song Stargazer. It is a straightforward lament mixed with a warning. Too much love is never enough. Yeah, you better seek out another road, because this one has ended abrupt. In the third verse, you feel this overwhelming sense of deep loss and begrudging acceptance. Maybe it's Cornell's final goodbye to his friend. I never wanted to write these words down for you with the pages of phrases of things we'll never do. Yeah, so I blow out the candle, and I put you to bed, since you can't say to me now how the dog broke your bone. There's just one thing left to be said. Say hello to heaven. And with those words, Cornell brings his grief-ridden eulogy to a close. Just a beautiful song that seems to resonate more by the year. During Temple of the Dog's second run in 1992, the album peaked at number 5 in the U.S. And the first single, Hunger Strike, shot to number 4 on the U.S. mainstream rock chart. Though less well known, Say Hello to Heaven did nearly as well on the charts. It reached number 5 on the U.S. mainstream rock chart. Sadly, just a few years ago, another layer of tragedy was added to this hymn of mourning. On May 18, 2017, Chris Cornell was found dead of an apparent suicide in his hotel room. It is so hard to see the great ones go, especially from that particular movement in time. I mean, Andy Wood, Doug Hopkins, Kurt Cobain, Shannon Hoon, Lane Staley, Scott Weiland, and Chris Cornell. Just absolutely heart-wrenching. In 2019, a concert called I Am the Highway was held in Chris Cornell's remembrance. A multitude of musicians participated. There was Metallica, Foo Fighters, the Melvins, Pearl Jam, and the remaining members of Soundgarden and Audioslave. During the course of the show, Say Hello to Heaven was covered surprisingly by Miley Cyrus. Probably not my first pick, but I'll let you make up your own minds about how she did. On other occasions, there have been other covers as well, two that come to mind, both Seattle bands, Queensryche in 2016, also Candlebox in 2017. The significance of this song, it cannot be overstated. Though it began as a tribute to a fallen brother, it's become a source of comfort for millions. I mean, the story of Andy Wood and Chris Cornell, beautiful tragedy. I mean, these two musical brothers brought out the best in each other. I'm inspired when I think about Chris's willingness to take Andy in. He could have judged him due to his addiction, but instead he freely offered his help to someone who was in need. Could definitely learn something from that. For me, this story is a call to reach out. If you know someone who needs help, don't let them suffer alone. I remember in an interview with Perry Farrell of Jane's Addiction, he really put it in perspective.
When you are under the sway of addiction, you become very desperate, and it can be a very sad life. There's also a real fun side to it, believe it or not. That's why you get addicted in the first place, because it's so much fun. You don't see it coming, but it ends up to destroy a lot of people. And it destroyed everybody I know that's been addicted.
Leave us a comment about Temple of the Dog, Chris Cornell, and Andrew Wood. What are your memories of Say Hello to Heaven, about this era? Also, if you like this episode, be sure to check out our companion piece about Pearl Jam's breakout anthem, Alive. You'll get even more insights about the story there. And finally, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to have you be a part of this community. We do this every single day. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.